The lamp in the small chamber at Utica burned low, and the man propped against the cushions reached, with a hand still wet from where the wound had been bound, for the sword his son's servants had hidden from him hours before. The household had thought him calmed, had thought the long evening of conversation about Plato and the soul's freedom was the conversation of a man preparing to sleep. He read on for a time, then he asked, very quietly, where his sword had gone. And when no one would answer, he struck the slave who had taken it. This is how Plutarch tells it, and we will return to the room in Utica, because everything we will say tonight returns to that room. But first, one must consider what brought a Roman senator, a great-grandson of Cato the Elder, a man who had stood in the Forum and refused the bribes of Caesar and Pompey alike, to a small African town on the Mediterranean coast in the spring of 46 before our era, with a republic dying behind him and an army of the victor marching toward his gate. One must consider what he was reading that night and why. One must consider what he meant by the word freedom, because he used it differently than we do, and the difference is the entire lesson. Let us begin with the principle, plainly stated. The Stoics held that a human life is not measured by its length, but by its conformity to reason and to virtue, and that the door, as Epictetus would later put it, is always open. By the door, he meant the option of voluntary death. He did not mean this as a recommendation. He meant it as a fact about the human condition that, properly understood, dissolves a certain kind of fear. If at any moment you may leave the room cannot imprison you. If at any moment you may set down the burden cannot crush you. The wise man, we are told, does not cling. He holds his life as a steward holds a thing belonging to another, ready at any hour to return it. This is the principle we will sit with tonight, the considered exit, self-possession in the face of death. Not the romantic gesture of the suicide as protest, which is a modern frame and largely a poor one, but the Stoic conviction that death, when it comes, must be met as one meets any other indifferent thing, with composure, with understanding, with a certain courtesy toward the universe. Cato did not invent this principle. He inherited it from Zeno and from Chrysippus and from the teachers of the Porch, and he learned it as a young man in the careful, joyless education his uncle gave him. But it was Cato who made the principle visible to Rome. It was Cato who, by the manner of his death, gave the next 3 centuries of Stoic writers their central example. Seneca will return to him again and again in the letters to Lucilius. Marcus Aurelius will hold him in mind on the Danube. Lucan will write of him as the moral conscience of the dying republic. The man becomes, after his death, what the Stoics called an exemplum, a living instance of the doctrine. We are told, in the 71st letter, that Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Cato did not survive freedom, nor freedom Cato." It is a small sentence, and it carries the weight of the entire episode. To understand it, we must understand what freedom meant to him, and why he believed it had ended. Consider the Roman Republic in its final convulsions. For 4 centuries, the city had governed itself through a complicated machinery of consuls and tribunes and senators, of public assemblies and yearly elections, of a citizenry that, however imperfectly, regarded itself as free in the specific sense that it bowed to no king. The Republic was not a democracy in our sense. It was an aristocratic order, slave-holding, expansionist, frequently violent, but it possessed a thing that mattered to men like Cato more than comfort or wealth or even life, and that thing was the absence of a master. A Roman senator was the equal of any other Roman senator. He stood, in principle, beneath no man. By the year 49, this order was already dissolving. Pompey and Caesar, two of the great commanders of the age, had ceased to share power and had begun to contest it. The Senate, divided and frightened, had largely sided with Pompey. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Civil war engulfed the Mediterranean. Pompey was defeated at Pharsalus in 48 and murdered shortly after on an Egyptian beach. The remnants of the Republican Party regrouped in North Africa, and Cato, who had spent the last decade of his life opposing both men with equal severity, took command of the city of Utica and held it for the Republican cause, while Metellus Scipio and King Juba assembled the army that would meet Caesar at Thapsus. Thapsus was fought in April of 46. It was a catastrophe. The Republican army was destroyed in a single afternoon. Scipio fled and would soon die. Juba fled and would soon die. Caesar marched toward Utica. In the city, Cato gathered the surviving senators and the equestrians and the Roman citizens who had taken refuge there. He convened a council. He told them calmly that those who wished to flee should flee, that those who wished to surrender should surrender, that he himself would do neither. He arranged transport. He arranged provisions. He sent his son away under pretext. He visited the wounded. He attended to the small administrative tasks of a magistrate closing his office for the last time. There is, in Plutarch's account, no rhetoric in this. There are no speeches. There is the quiet competence of a man finishing his work. This is the circumstance into which the principle enters. A man of 58, in good health, possessed of property and family and considerable reputation, in a small African town with a hostile army approaching. He is not cornered. He could flee. Caesar, who has made a policy of clemency throughout the war, would almost certainly spare him. Cicero will accept Caesar's clemency. Brutus will accept it. Many will. The clemency is not a trap. It is the genuine policy of a victor who wishes to be remembered as merciful. Cato will not accept it. We must understand why, because the reason is not pride, though pride is the easy modern reading. The reason is philosophical, and it is exact. To accept clemency from Caesar is to acknowledge that Caesar has the standing to grant it. It is to receive one's life as a gift from a man who, by Cato's understanding, has no right to give it. It is to become, in the relevant sense, Caesar's possession, and a Stoic, Cato believed, cannot be any man's possession. The wise man belongs to the universe and to reason, and to no other authority. To live by Caesar's permission is to live not as a free man, but as a freed slave, which is precisely the condition Cato has spent his life refusing. So he goes to dinner. This is the evening of which Plutarch gives us such a strangely intimate account, and we should attend to it carefully, because everything Cato does in these last hours is itself the lesson. He eats with his friends. The conversation is philosophical, as it has been every evening of his adult life. They discuss the Stoic paradoxes. They discuss the proposition that only the wise man is free and that all bad men are slaves. Cato, we are told, defends this thesis with unusual vehemence, and his companions notice. They notice because the vehemence does not match the after-dinner mood of the room. They suspect, some of them, what he intends. After dinner, he walks for a while. He embraces his son. He retires to his chamber. He calls for a book, and the book he calls for is the Phaedo, the dialogue of Plato, in which Socrates, in his prison cell, speaks of the immortality of the soul before drinking the hemlock. Cato reads it through. He reads it a second time. He sleeps or seems to sleep. Toward morning, he wakes and asks after the ships that are to carry the refugees from the harbor. He is told they have sailed. Good, he says. He asks for his sword. The sword has been removed. His son and his friends, suspecting his intention, have hidden it. When Cato discovers this, he strikes the slave who took it, and he strikes him hard enough to bruise his own hand. Then he composes himself. He summons his son. He explains, with what Plutarch describes as great gentleness, that the choice of his death is his own and cannot be taken from him by the love of his family, that to deprive a man of his sword is not to deprive him of his freedom, that he can dash his head against the wall or refuse food if he must. The son weeps. The sword is returned. Cato sends everyone from the room. He reads the Phaedo a third time. He places the book aside. He takes the sword and strikes himself a single blow beneath the breast. The wound is mortal, but not immediate. He falls from the couch. The household hears the noise and rushes in. A physician is brought. The physician, finding the entrails not pierced, replaces them and stitches the wound. Cato seems, for a moment, to accept this. Then, when the room is again quiet, he tears the stitches open with his own hands and dies. This is the scene Seneca will return to. This is the scene Lucan will set to verse. This is the scene that becomes, for the next 300 years, the central image of Stoic death. Now we must ask what the principle teaches, because the answer is not what a modern listener might at first suppose. The principle does not teach that one should die. The Stoics are emphatic on this point. Life is what they call a preferred indifferent. It is, all things equal, to be chosen. The wise man does not seek death. He does not regard his life as a burden. He performs his duties, attends to his obligations, raises his children, serves his city. He lives, in Marcus Aurelius's phrase, as one who has been given a part to play and plays it through to the close. What the principle teaches is something more subtle. It teaches that the value of a life lies not in its continuation, but in its conformity to virtue, and that when continuation and virtue diverge, virtue takes precedence. The wise man does not cling to life on terms that compromise his soul. He does not bargain with tyrants. He does not accept dignity as a gift from those who have no right to confer it. He holds his life lightly, not because life is worthless, but because something is worth more than life, and the something is the integrity of the rational self. Notice what this means in practice. It means that the question Cato faced in Utica is not fundamentally a question about death. It is a question about what conditions one will accept in order to continue living. Most lives, most of the time, do not pose this question in its sharpest form. We negotiate small accommodations daily. We swallow small humiliations. We accept inconveniences and indignities of various weights. The Stoic does not condemn this. The Stoic recognizes that the rational man calibrates. He distinguishes between the trivial and the essential. But there is a point, the Stoics maintain, beyond which no rational man can be asked to continue. It is the point at which to continue would be to become something one cannot consent to be. For Cato, that point was the acceptance of Caesar's clemency, because to accept it was to acknowledge a permanent change in the structure of the Roman world, a change he had spent his life resisting. The Republic was his moral home. To outlive it would be, for him, not survival, but a kind of impersonation. He would be a man wearing the costume of a Roman senator in a city that no longer had Roman senators in the sense the word had meant. This is the considered exit. It is considered in two senses. It is considered because it follows long thought, not impulse. Cato did not decide to die at the news of Thapsus. The decision was the conclusion of years of philosophical training, of decades of political reflection, of an entire life arranged around a specific understanding of what it meant to be free. The night of the Phaedo is not the night the decision was made. It is the night the decision was executed. The decision had been made, in a sense, much earlier, perhaps in the schoolroom where his uncle had set him to read the Stoics, and it is considered, in the second sense, that it is undertaken with the full and lucid presence of the rational mind. There is no frenzy, there is no despair. Plutarch's portrait is striking precisely for its calm. The man eats his dinner, he converses, he reads, he sleeps, he attends to the practical arrangements for the safety of others. He bruises his hand, striking a slave, which is the one moment of disorder in the account, and we should not look away from it, because Cato was a Roman master with all the assumptions of his class, and the Stoic principle did not in his case extend to questioning the institution of slavery itself. The blind spot is real. We name it and we move on. What we should attend to is the structure of the night. Everything in it is deliberate. The choice of the Phaedo is deliberate, because the Phaedo is the dialogue in which Socrates demonstrates that the philosopher does not fear death, and Cato is placing himself, by the act of reading it, in the long line of philosophical deaths that begins with Socrates and that he intends to extend. The conversation about Stoic paradox at dinner is deliberate. The dismissal of the household is deliberate. Even the tearing of the stitches at the end is deliberate, and it is the most important detail in the whole account because it shows that the act was not a moment's resolve but a sustained intention. The physician offered him a path back. He refused it. Twice he chose. This brings us to what the principle is actually teaching the listener tonight. It is teaching, first, that the freedom the Stoics speak of is not the freedom we usually mean. It is not the absence of external constraint. It is not the ability to do what one wishes. It is something prior to those things and more fundamental. It is the capacity of the rational self to remain its own possession, regardless of circumstance. The man in chains can have it. The emperor on the throne can lack it. Epictetus, who was born a slave, will later teach this with the authority of one who has lived both conditions. The Stoic freedom is internal. It is the unbroken consent of the self to the self. It is teaching, second, that this freedom is preserved by the constant awareness of the open door, not by passing through it, by knowing it is there. The man who knows he can leave at any moment is not at the mercy of those who would compel him. The threat of death loses its leverage. The threat of pain loses its grip. He becomes, in the precise sense the Stoics mean, ungovernable by fear. This is not because he is reckless. It is because he has internally resolved a question that most men leave unresolved, and the resolution gives him a kind of stillness that nothing in the world can disturb. It is teaching, third, that the manner of one's exit, when it comes, is itself part of the life. The Stoics did not believe in a soul state separable from conduct. A life is the sum of its acts, and the last act is included. To die well is to complete the work. To die badly is to undo a portion of what came before. Cato understood that his death was not the end of his political career. It was the final act of it. By dying as he did, in the manner he did, with the Book of Socrates beside him, he made the death itself a statement that no orator could have surpassed. He gave the dying republic its monument, and the monument was his own body. And it is teaching, fourth, the lesson that is hardest to hear, that the considered exit is available not only at the end. The principle of the open door is to be carried daily. It is not a contingency plan for catastrophe. It is a posture of the soul. One lives, the Stoics held, as one ready at any hour to depart, and the readiness is not morbid. The readiness is what allows the present hour to be inhabited fully. The man who is not afraid to leave the room is the man who can sit in the room without distraction. The man who holds his life lightly is the man who can give his life its full attention. Marcus Aurelius will write 2 centuries after Cato's death in the second book of his Meditations. Since it is possible that thou mayest depart from life this very moment, regulate every act and thought accordingly. This is the principle distilled. Cato lived by it. Marcus lived by it. Epictetus taught it. Seneca wrote of it in nearly every letter. It is the central Stoic teaching about death, and it is the teaching that has come down to us most clearly because the philosophers who articulated it most fully also embodied it in their conduct. We are not Cato. We are not Romans of the late Republic. We do not face Caesar's army at our gates. The specific occasion of his death is unlikely to be ours, but the principle is not bound to its occasion. The principle is that the rational self is sovereign over its own continuation, and that the awareness of this sovereignty is the foundation of every other Stoic virtue. Courage proceeds from it. Justice proceeds from it. Temperance and wisdom proceed from it. Without the considered relationship to one's own death, the other virtues lack their ground. So let us return, before we close, to the room in Utica. The lamp has burned through the night. The book lies on the small table beside the couch. The man on the couch has died twice, in a sense, once by his own hand, and once by his refusal of the physician's repair. The household stands in the doorway. The sun is rising over the African coast. In a few hours, Caesar's outriders will reach the gates of the city, and Caesar himself, when he hears the news, will say, according to Plutarch, "Cato, I grudge thee thy death, as thou hast grudged me the preservation of thy life." Consider what Caesar means. He means that Cato has won. He means that the death has removed from Caesar the one gesture by which Caesar might have completed his victory, which was the public pardon of his greatest enemy. By dying, Cato has made himself ungrantable. He has placed himself permanently beyond the reach of the man who conquered the Republic, and the conquest is, in that small, precise way, incomplete forever. Caesar understands this immediately, and the bitterness in the remark is the bitterness of a man who has just learned that he has lost something he did not know was at stake. This is what self-possession looks like at its furthest extension. Not a defiance, not a gesture, a simple, terrible refusal to be possessed. The question we may carry from this episode is not whether we would do what Cato did. Almost certainly, we would not, and the Stoics would not ask it of us. The question is the one Cato had answered long before that night, and that his readiness to die was only the visible sign of having answered. The question is this: what conditions would you accept in order to continue, and what conditions would you refuse? You need not answer tonight. You need not answer tomorrow. But the question, once put to oneself honestly, begins to clarify the small daily accommodations by which a life is either kept or quietly traded away. The man who knows what he will not accept knows by the same act what he is. And what he is, the Stoics held, is the only thing he ever truly possesses. The lamp in Utica has gone out. The book remains.